Hey, good morning and good afternoon to some. For those of you who will be joining, or maybe perhaps experience some of our other virtual community conversations. For those who may not know, Dr. Hairston, Senior Pastor of Living Word Bible Fellowship here in Columbus, Ohio. And I have with me as my guest panelists, Ms. Beth Tabor of the Como Church and Como Recovery. So, Beth, thank you so much for being with me and our faith community, the Living Word Bible Fellowship family, and for all of our family and friends and guests who are joining on our discussion. Let's just jump right out there. You know,
Okay.
opioid has impacted our country, has impacted our state, but most importantly, it impacted Central Ohio. What have you guys experienced, or what have you seen? Have you seen where some of the numbers are sliding backwards, or is it steady, or is it increasing? But from your organization's perspective, what's your kind of viewpoint on how it's affected Central Ohio?
Wow. So they haven't officially released 2020's opioid statistics yet, but from 2019 going forward, the opioid deaths and accidental overdose have just continually increased and increased. In 2019, there were over 4,000 accidental opioid deaths, which is a pretty significant increase. And this year in 2020, I think that they're having a difficulty actually measuring the amount of deaths and the increase because of COVID. So a lot of people are staying in their homes. And I say in their homes, they're staying in where we work in the bottoms primarily. And then our recovery center is in Westerville, but in the inner city, people are staying in the trap houses or drug houses, and that's where they're overdosing and then ultimately dying. And so it's very hard to get a real clear statistic of what is actually going on, particularly this year because of COVID.
Now, now let me ask you this, because I know and we'll get into some of the resources that your organization has done, and maybe perhaps even the history of how you and your husband have gotten involved. But you mentioned about working on the bottoms, and for those who may not be familiar with Columbus, that's on the west side of Columbus, immediately as you pass the downtown area. Are you finding where this challenge has impacted those of few economic resources more so than those who may perhaps be financially in a higher category? Or are you just finding where this challenge has impacted just people across the board?
I think it's impacted people across the board. And what we see over the course of somebody's path of addiction is it doesn't depend necessarily where they start out. So you can have somebody in a very high paying job who ultimately will end up in
Mhm.
the bottoms. That's where most of the drugs are bought and sold. And then if the people are able to maintain a higher economic status, then the people then from the bottoms deliver the drugs up to them. So it's kind of a revolving circle of what happens down there particularly. I don't know if
What?
that answered that question.
No, no, I think it's a great answer, because I think, what we've seen is sometimes people with um, maybe even from a stereotypical perspective of today's addict, we think of them as being someone who does not have really the finances, or maybe coming from a scenario of the lower bottom of the economic status scale. But as you just mentioned, this has impacted just everybody across the board, no matter where they are financially. But because of the impact, it may put them in that position of lower economics. Now, let me
Right.
ask this question. Just a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your husband. What inspired you guys to get into this lane? I mean, this is not an easy lane to be in, and I can only imagine, especially you guys are part of the faith community. What was the inspiration behind that?
So I think about 10 years ago, we have three children, and they're all 10 years ago, they were all in their late teens. And we had left a church and started a church um, that catered to probably young people, because that's what our kids were. And in the midst of all of that, we started a Bible study at our home. And our children brought kids that would not attend church, that just would not go to any other church. And they were just, for whatever reason, they just didn't attend church. And so what ended up happening is these kids that came brought what people would call fringe kids, kids that just were way out there. And more drug addicts just came to our house every Sunday. We had a meal and we had a Bible study, and we ended up with probably 50 drug addict kids that just came to our house, and we served a meal and we just began to have spiritual conversations. Ultimately, so we then our children, our teens, led the group conversations. We didn't. We were just cooked and just kind of like corralled them all around. Mm-hmm. And eventually they brought this kid who was really high and got kicked out of his house. And they said he was homeless and he didn't have any place to live. And so I asked my husband if he could stay with us. And so we brought this teenager, he's like 19 years old, into our home high. And it was a male, and we have 2 daughters. And so my husband said, he can stay just, a couple of nights, we can find some place for him to go. Well, 9 months later, we got him into college. And so the word just got out that if you're on drugs and you needed a safe place to go, to come to our house. So eventually we ended up with a lot of people that just brought people to us. And so we thought, well, we probably should do this like for real. And then began coma recovery. And so we, formally threw our hat in the ring, and that's what we do. And then from our residential, one of the things that we found in doing this residentially is a link to human trafficking. Mm-hmm. And we found that of the young women that came to us across all socioeconomic, it didn't really matter where they came from, but I would say 95 to 99% of women that came to us had been trafficked in some way, shape, or form. And so then we sought to kind of bridge the gap between addiction and trafficking, sex trafficking. And so we ended up ultimately down on Sullivan Avenue, and Souder and Sullivan Avenue, which is one of the hottest spots for human trafficking in Ohio. We opened up a women's drop-in center for women that are victims of human trafficking. And then as of, I think we're coming up on our 2nd year, we opened up our men's drop-in center for men that experience homelessness, addiction, and then there are men that are trafficked as well. So we've kind of like gone full circle with the whole thing, so that we can be down there, not to rescue anybody necessarily, but to offer something that hasn't been offered before. If a man or a woman says, I want to leave the street immediately and change my life, we have the ability to immediately take them into our crisis room and then help them decide what they ultimately want to do with sobriety or what they want to do with their lives. We'll help them. We'll facilitate their exit any way they choose.
So it sounds as though you guys didn't initially just say, hey, this is something we want to jump into. It sounds with your children and just the heart of you and your husband, you guys kind of navigated based upon what was in front of you, and it kind of evolved into you actually doing it in a formal way. How supportive has maybe perhaps the city of Columbus been, or the faith community been? I mean, has it been a struggle, or have you seen kind of an open arms network of people who want to embrace what you guys are doing down in the bottoms?
Well, we've pretty much had to prove ourselves to the government. The government, they need help with the opiate addiction. I mean, the opiate crisis, they say that they want faith-based people to help them. But then when it comes to actually utilizing necessarily the faith-based community, that's kind of a sticky wicket there. They just, we've had to really prove ourselves. So we do now take court referrals. We do work with Franklin County Court. We work with catch court for females victims of trafficking. So, but we've had to, like, each case that we take, they, really watch what we're doing. They watch how we present in court. But we think that as people of faith, we should do what they're doing better.
Hmm.
So we strive to represent the faith community to the best of our ability. And each time we do well, we get a little bit more support. We don't take financial support from government at all.
Okay. Okay. Well, let me ask you this. I mean, for those who may perhaps be watching and listening, some of the questions may come out in terms of maybe twofold. Like if I'm in the boat where I need help, do you only cater to those who live in that particular area, or how does one maybe seek out your recovery center?
So, like I said, we do take court referrals.
Mhm.
We take majority of our referrals come from people of faith.
Okay.
Churches will say, "Hey, I know this lady whose son is having a difficulty, and we request that the child." Well, they're really adults. We don't take children. We request that their child reach out to us personally, and then we just kind of go through an interview process. Our our recovery program is long term, and so somebody comes to us, they stay with us a minimum of 18 months, and that's a really long time for somebody to make a commitment. And but the greatest success comes from the longest treatment. And so like I said, most of our referrals come from people that just hear about us. We don't advertise because we're free and we don't take insurance. We just want to help people. Most of the time when people are ready to quit using opiates, they've lost everything and they've bankrupted their families. Their families have exhausted all of their financial means, and we don't want to be one more burden on a family. So we do everything free for the family and then the person coming into the program.
Okay. So for the most part, I guess, especially if there may be some who are watching and listening, they may say, how can I participate from maybe, perhaps volunteering or maybe some type of help and support. And so for the most part, you do not take government funding.
No.
And so the greatest need that you may perhaps comes from those of the faith community, and they can give in some type of way, whether or not it's maybe financials. Are there any type of things that the organizations needs that people can donate or perhaps give to helping out someone who's a part of your program?
Um, you're correct. Our greatest need is always financial.
Mhm.
There are ways to volunteer in recovery. It's kind of a closed volunteer because we have to protect people's anonymity.
Right.
And the people that volunteer, we've learned that when people come to us, they are at the very bottom.
Mhm.
And addiction is a pretty predictable disease. People, just like heart disease, it has specific symptoms. And so when people get to the point where they're ready to dedicate a year and a half of their life to getting well, they're pretty broken. And um, and people that want to help are pretty vulnerable, have vulnerable hearts.
Right.
So we're protecting the people that want to help them as well as our clients as well. Um, so we don't really let people volunteer in recovery because it's kind of a bad deal for everybody.
Right.
But people can volunteer at the Men or Women's Drop-In Center.
Okay.
We constantly have a need for clothing, food, um, gloves, hats, underwear, hygiene products, and then the overflow then goes to our clients that it's in recovery.
Okay. So people can actually volunteer at the drop-in centers, and they can donate
Yes,
items to individuals, not necessarily part of the recovery program, but those participating in the men's drop-in and the women's drop-in center that are located
right.
in the bottoms area of Columbus's West Side. Now, let me ask you this: like again, you and your husband are doing church. How do you guys blend? Because some people are going to ask themselves, and there may be even those watching who want to mirror this concept of how do you blend recovery and what you do from a faith-based perspective?
Um, well, that's kind of difficult. So when people come to us, this may be more information than what you want. So
Mhm,
when people come to us, they rarely, if ever, have any faith.
mhm,
They feel that not that God's abandoned them, that they've abandoned God by their behavior. They're very, very broken. And so they don't feel lovable. They don't think that they necessarily could ever be forgiven by God. They think that they've done too much and they've gone too far. So we don't require people have faith, and we don't require that people come to faith in our program. But we do say that we have faith and we believe that God can and will restore them to brand new. We
mhm,
believe, and we tell, we say that you've gotten yourself through a series of events in one giant mess, and there has to be something bigger than you to get you out of that. And
mhm.
so we say you're going to be here, you're going to do these things, you are going to go to church, you are going to participate in a Bible study. You don't have to listen, you don't have to believe it, you just have to not be hostile.
Okay.
And as they go on their journey, they realize that a God of their understanding is them. And so, then again, logically, if they got themselves here, they're probably not going to get themselves out. And slowly, very slowly, they start to believe um, that they need something greater than them.
Right.
And we say, we will love you unconditionally. And sometimes our staff is the very first example they have of unconditional love.
Mm,
And if they can accept love from us, then they can begin to accept the love of Christ. But it's a pretty tough journey.
mhm.
And we just have to allow them to experience that journey. And we tell people all the time, without faith, we couldn't do this.
Right.
And I tell them, without faith, I couldn't put up with you. so so we're, because we kind of all go on this journey together, they get to see faith work out in our lives. And then hopefully then, they ultimately then believe that there is something that Christ can love them unconditionally.
Well, you said something, Beth, that I think that is very instrumental to this whole process is that in some cases, even those of us who have been a part of the faith community, especially from a church worship perspective, in which we emphasize worship services or Bible studies or things that's going to help people grow in their own personal lives. And so when we're dealing with scenarios that kind of take us out of the traditional box of church, I think the faith community sometimes wrestles with, hey, how do I still stay in alignment with my faith perspective or those things that I do to symbolize my faith. At the same time, I'm trying to help. But I think one of the things that you just said is very important for those who are listening is that your faith helps you do what you do, and the love that you show in and of itself goes to a person who may perhaps not know what love looks like or may have been
Right.
loved the wrong way. And so it wasn't so much, I think, again, as you said, hey, we would like you to participate in these things that we believe add to your life, but you may walk away from here and still not believe it. You may not
Right.
like it. But love is what gravitates you to understanding who Christ is, and not some of the things that we symbolically associate
Right.
with our faith. And so, um, I think you and your husband, man, serve as a great example of just going past the walls, the traditional walls of the church. As a good friend of mine said one time, we don't fly over the poor to minister to the poor. We minister
Right.
home as well as abroad. And so I think you guys share as a great example. Beth, a lot of our listeners and those participating in this virtual community are of African American community. And especially here in Central Ohio, we've noticed that, when there was a heavy crack epidemic in the 90s, there wasn't a lot of resources out. And now the government and the counties and the state officials are really supporting behind this particular epidemic. Um, do you find where even being out on the west side, there's a support mechanism for your program where African Americans are recognizing your resource, or do you find where it's still a struggle for those individuals to trust your process and become a part of your network of recovery?
Um, so out um, out on the west side, one of our primary contacts or resources are is the Van Buren Homeless Shelter.
Hmm.
And that's traditionally a women's shelter, but in the winter, it's open to men and women both.
Hmm.
Um, and so we partner with them because at our drop-in centers, we provide clothing, food, hygiene products, showers, medical treatment. Um, uh, we just recently started to provide for women STD and STI and uh, testing, and then PrEP, which is preventative HIV medication. And so the you have to earn. Oh gosh, I hope this comes across right. So I hope this is answering your question. So we have to be there every day that we're open to earn trust for all races. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I would say we see, it just depends on the day. Some days we see more African Americans, and
Hmm.
some days we see mostly people from Russia. There's like a large Russian community down there. And then sometimes we just see um, just all white people. It just doesn't matter. But we have to earn the trust the same across the board for everybody. If we don't do what we say and be who we say that we are, you know, you lose your trust pretty fast.
Hmm.
You know, the Columbus Fire Department comes down and at least once a month and passes out Narcan for everybody. And again, so we haven't seen racial division down there. I don't know if that's answering what you're asking or not. I mean, all of our resources tend to be for equally for everybody.
Right. And for the most part, you're exactly right. I think you guys offer, like many organizations offer to just everybody. I mean, you don't discriminate in it. One of the challenges and the reason why I think it is a fairly important question is because we're really, I think you just said it, it's really about a trust. And it's about being able to go, hey, these resources are credible resources that are there for us to be able to utilize, and not so much trust, but we're aware of it, especially
Right,
when we're talking about a particular side of town and the demographics are, a little bit all over the place, in terms of different races and stuff like that. But I think one of the most important things that we can walk away from is being able to identify your resource, your organization as a place in which all types of individuals can experience, not only from a volunteer and a give perspective, but there may be somebody who's in that position right now who may say, this is a trusted organization and maybe I need to link up with
right,
them because of their services. Or I may have some family or some friends who are going through this situation right now. And it's good to know there's Beth and Tim out there in their organization that we can
right,
connect with. And so, that's one of the reasons why I think it becomes an important type of question and something to look into. Let me ask you
right.
this. Has there ever been a time where you and Tim both have just said, you know what, this is too heavy? I don't know whether or not we can carry this cross anymore. I mean, what keeps you guys passionate about just going on every day?
So when you see somebody, for me, this is what makes me do this every single day of my life. When I see somebody come into, so we have this woman who caught, I have permission to kind of tell her story. So just so you know, so we met her at the Women's Center, and she was a prostitute and sold crack right behind right behind our building. She was in this trailer, and her friend was murdered, and she came in and then she burnt down the crime scene.
Mm.
And so she came in and confessed this felony to us and said, this is what happened. And she ultimately went to jail. She got arrested for arson and I think just destroying a crime scene. And so she was in jail, and one of our volunteers really liked her. And we ultimately worked a deal with Franklin County, and we got a second-degree felon arsonist out into our program. So when she came into our program, she had already lost one child. She had a son that she had lost through Child Protective Services due to her addiction. And she had another daughter that was staying with friends of hers. And yesterday, she got her 3-year sobriety coin.
Mm.
And to watch God transform, I mean, it's not us, to watch God truly make a transformation of somebody who's been in and out of prison, lost, and she got her 9-year-old daughter back through all of this. We get to watch what a great God can do to somebody, you know, and we just feel that we have the best seat in the house, you know. We feel bad for people that don't get to watch God work in a miraculous way every single day. And we just feel very blessed to be able to be an instrument that God uses.
No, I think that's an awesome story. And I think, I want to compliment you and everyone who works with you, both you and your husband as well, because I think it's that type of compassion that can help someone get back on the road again. And I want to be able to share with our viewers where you're actually located, because if I'm correct, you guys do a Bible study and you do a formal church services as well as the recovery. Am I correct?
We do. We're down right now. We used to do a Thursday night recovery service, but
Okay.
because of COVID, we haven't. Because we've been in and out of quarantine because of our proximity to a lot of people. So we kind of roll in and out of being
Right.
quarantine.
Well, I want to make sure that people are aware of how they can be able to bridge to what you guys do, because I think what you're doing out on the West Side, as well as you said in Westerville, is incredible. And we need to highlight more organizations like you, because again, we go through everyday life, and all of us at some point in time, this particular epidemic has been on the front door of everybody's step. No matter where you live, no matter your socioeconomics, no matter what color you are, what gender you are, whether or not you're in urban or rural or even suburban America, it's
Right.
it's landed on your front doorstep. And so I think what you guys
Right.
do is incredible. I mean, you're a blessing to Central Ohio. And so I think, whatever ways that people can give, that you want to make sure that we can give. And so for all of those watching, if anything, keep you in our prayers, because
Oh, for sure.
it cannot be easy trying to change lives and sometimes deal with the difficulties that come with transformation. So we want to applaud you. And Beth, again, I want to say thank you for taking the time out today to be a part of this virtual discussion. And hopefully, as you guys move forward, people become again more aware of your resources and how to tap in and look for ways that maybe perhaps down at Catch Court and working with Franklin County, that they can even see ways that they can get involved and know that you guys are out there. But again, any departing words that you can say, if you had to say anything to those who may perhaps be listening about your organization, or just something that can lay into the hearts and minds of somebody who may be watching, anything you want to share before we go away?
I think to people who have been affected by by the addiction and this crisis, there is always hope. There is always hope. Some people just throw their towel in and say, just nothing's going to make a difference. There is always hope. You know, God can and will restore us to new. And I believe that there's hope in the inner city. I just believe that, that's true.
No, that's awesome. Beth, again, thank you for taking the time. We wish you the
Welcome.
best. And for those who are watching and listening, again, look forward to not only participating in this discussion, but we want to encourage you to fill out our survey as to what you think and what you've learned. And then again, look for us in the future as we continue these virtual discussions on how this opioid epidemic has impacted Central Ohio. And so I'm Dr. Kevin Hairston with Living Word Bible Fellowship. Remember to always keep the faith as we keep in touch. God bless until the next